It's already almost been 8 years since the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. This production was put in place so all of us back at home can watch top up-and-coming talent from all around the world square off for a chance of changing their life and earning a UFC contract. But the catch was these fighters couldn't just win, they had to impress and put on a performance worthy of this life-changing opportunity. And I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely loved watching the Snoop cast during this season.
I'm gonna put you back to bed because you've been acting a fool. Didn't I tell you to go back to bed? Get back in that room and go to bed. Get to bed! I'm from Jamaica. We don't touch hands, man. We put hands on you, man.
These guys, he's doing a good job of shaking and making him fall off the top.
Go danced on your ass. He twerked you off of him.
So who were all the winners from Season 1 of Dana White's Contender Series and where are they at now? The very first fighter to earn a contract in Contender Series history goes to Kurt Hollowell. Hollowell made his professional MMA debut in 2011, and after just a year and a half, he had already racked up a 9-0 record with 8 of his wins coming by stoppage. He was then signed to Strikeforce but would lose in his debut with the promotion. However, despite coming off of a loss, he would end up getting signed to the UFC due to the Strikeforce merging with the UFC. But then in his promotional debut with the UFC, he would lose again, causing him to get cut. But he would bounce back, and in his next 10 fights, he would go 8-2 before getting a call with a chance to earn his way back into the UFC through the Contender Series. He would win by first round knockout, making him the first Contender Series contract winner. Unfortunately, after this, things wouldn't go quite as planned. Immediately after, Hollowell would be fined $750 and was suspended for 9 months for illegally injecting an IV before his Contender Series match without disclosing the Athletic Commission. This would also cause his fight to be overturned to a no contest. Regardless, he would still be signed to the UFC, but things would continue to get worse. He would get finished in his first 2 fights and then would be cut again after losing a 3rd time by decision. But this guy is like the king of fighting outside the UFC because he would win his next 2 fights both by knockout and then would get a call from the UFC for a 3rd opportunity, but this time through the Ultimate Fighter Season 31. And Hollowell would absolutely dominate his way through the competition.
Come on, Jason, fight back.
Yet again earning another contract with the UFC, and I'm pretty sure that makes him the only fighter to earn contracts through both the Contender Series and the Ultimate Fighter. But let's see if 3rd time's the charm.
For your winner by unanimous decision, Trey Shamura.
Well, maybe not. Or maybe so, because after that, Hollowell would finally get his first ever UFC win in 2024, but would lose again to Alexander Hernandez. However, he's scheduled to fight the zesty Jordan Levitt this Saturday, so let's see if he can get back in the win column. Boston Salmon was 5-1 with 4 of his 5 wins coming by knockout. And on the Contender Series, he would impressively win a decision against a very tough Ricky Tercios. However, several canceled bouts due to injuries left him sidelined from the octagon for 2 years before finally getting the chance to show the world what he can do. And just 25 seconds into the first round, this happens.
6th of 2017.
In his next fight, Salmon would get knocked out again in the first round and get cut from the UFC. Later on, he would sign with the PFL and is currently 1-1 with the PFL. And on his Instagram, he still has strong aspirations of becoming a world champion. But fun fact about Boston Salmon is that he actually fought in an amateur boxing match against former welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. In week 2, Shawn Ali became the only person to receive a contract. He started his professional MMA career in Montana, but would move to Arizona after meeting Tim Welch. At the time, Tim was in Montana commentating on a local show that he previously had fought on, where an 18-year-old Shawn O'Malley just happened to be fighting on that card. Tim saw potential in O'Malley and offered to train him in Arizona. Eventually, O'Malley would save up $2,000, packed up all his belongings in a 2006 Nissan Altima, and drove 20 hours by himself to Arizona, where him and Tim would get an apartment together, and the rest is history. After an insanely viral wheel kick knockout, improving his record to 7-0, he would get the call for the Contender Series. But at first glance, O'Malley didn't look like your typical MMA fighter, and he didn't fight like one either. His unorthodox look, his flashy style, and personality not only impressed Dana White, but captivated fans who couldn't wait to see more.
Oh, he tried to strike. Oh! Got him in the, what is that?
You don't want to know.
Take the booty position? Take the booty position. Oh!
O'Malley with the
hand. Oh! 3-piece dinner with biscuits. Oh, O'Malley! O'Malley! O'Malley!
Tell ya.
O'Malley! Give that kid a contract!
I'm looking for exciting. I'm looking for flashy. I'm looking for somebody who has that thing.
What is that thing?
Shawn O'Malley is that thing.
And in the beginning of his career with the UFC, he had his fair share of setbacks, but whenever he stepped in that octagon, he made sure to put on a show. After racking up several performance bonuses and becoming a household name, it was time to see if it was all hype or if he was actually a world championship caliber fighter. A close split decision win over Petr Yan may have been controversial, but it proved O'Malley has the skills to compete against the best bantamweights in the world. He would prove it again by TKOing Aljamain Sterling and fulfilling his dream of becoming a world champion. However, yet again, he was met with criticism, as many believed his fight against Sterling was stopped too early. But O'Malley would finally silence all critics when he avenged his only defeat with a dominating performance over Marlon Chito Vera. He would then headline one of the biggest events in UFC history when he took on Merab at the Sphere in Las Vegas, but unfortunately would lose his title by decision. He now gets the chance to avenge his second defeat at UFC 316, which at the time of recording this video is a little over a week away. Jeff Neal was 7-2 with a notable TKO loss over Kevin Holland before he got in the Contender Series. He was able to impress Dana White with a first round knockout, which earned him a UFC contract, and in the UFC he went on a 5-fight win streak, beating guys like Bilal Muhammad, Nico Price, and Mike Perry, but then would lose 2 in a row to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Neil Magny, but then would bounce back in his fight against Vicente Luque. He would lose to Shavkat Rakhmonov, but both fights earning him performance bonuses, and then also later on would lose to Ian Gary. His last fight was a TKO win over Rafael dos Anjos, and just recently he had to pull out of his fight with Carlos Prates due to an injury, so not too sure when he'll be back. Carl Robertson was 0-3 as a kickboxer, but as an MMA fighter, he held a record of 4-0. On the Contender Series, all it took was 15 seconds for him to make quick work of Ryan Spann. In 6 fights, he would go 4-2 in the UFC, which included a loss to Glover Teixeira, and after his win against Roman Kopylov, everything would go completely downhill. He got submitted twice in a row by Marvin Vettori and Brandon Allen, and then immediately after would get knocked out twice in a row by Khalil Roundtree and Kennedy and Nzechukwu. Getting finished 4 times in a row caused him to get cut from the UFC, and his next fight outside of the promotion would be his last fight to date, which was a decision loss in Jorge Masvidal's bare knuckle MMA promotion. That was back in March of 2024, and since then he has gone ghost on social media, so not too sure if he still plans on fighting. Brandon Davis was 7-3 when he got the call for the Contender Series and had won a title in a smaller organization. On the Contender, he beat Austin Arnett by unanimous decision in a very bloody mess of a fight. He would go 2-5 in the UFC and would actually be the one who got submitted by Zabit Magomed Sharipov with that viral knee bar / banana split submission, which had happened only twice ever, and both were on that very same night. But after losing 4 of his last 5 fights, he would be released from the UFC. Outside the promotion, he would go on a 4-fight win streak, which included another title win, earning him a second chance in the UFC, but this was very short-lived as he immediately lost 2 fights in a row and was cut again. And then after that, he would lose outside the UFC before going to Jorge Masvidal's bare knuckle MMA promotion, and in this venture, he would win 1, lose 1, and a 3rd fight would go to a no contest, but he hasn't fought since November of 2024. When he's not working on his fight career, he currently works as a UPS delivery driver. Julian Marquez got on the Contender Series with a record of 5-1, and all 5 of his wins were coming by stoppage, and even having a notable win over Matt the Hammer Hamill. On the Contender, he would take on Phil Hawes, who was a huge prospect at the time with a lot of hype around him until this happened.
Looking for another one right here.
Probably one of the most devastating head kick knockouts you will ever see. And in the UFC, he would become known for his willingness to throw caution to the wind and get into insane brawls, which very often ended with him getting knocked out. He's currently 3-5 in the UFC and on a 4-fight losing streak, getting knocked out in all 4 of those last fights. He also runs a podcast with a P-Star, but they haven't uploaded in a couple years. But he does have a cool nickname, being the Cuban Missile Crisis, so at least there's that. Mike Rodriguez came into the Contender Series with a record of 8-2, and all of his 8 wins were coming by stoppage. He knocked out Jamel Jones in round 1, but in the UFC he would go 2-5 and would be cut after losing 3 fights in a row. It appears like he may have retired from MMA because his next fight outside the UFC was in June of 2022, which was a TKO win, but he hasn't fought since. He is now an entrepreneur and coaches at a gym called Level Ground MMA in Boston, Massachusetts. God damn it. Alex Perez was a very experienced mixed martial artist when he got on the Contender Series, holding a record of 17-4. On the show, he won in the first round by Anaconda choke and earned himself a UFC contract. In the UFC, Alex would go on a 3-fight win streak before losing to Joseph Benavidez, and then go on another 3-fight win streak, which included a very rare leg kick TKO, earning him a title shot against Davis and Figueiredo. He would get submitted in round 1, and in his last 4 fights would go 1-3. But he hasn't announced his retirement yet, and still posts about training, so we may see him get in the octagon again. But in the meantime, while training, he owns and runs an acai diner in California. Grant Dawson came to the Contender Series with a record of 11-1 and with a 100% finishing rate. He continued this streak in dominant fashion and eventually submitted Adrian Diaz, and in the UFC he would go on an absolute tear, winning 8 fights in a row, which included an impressive win over the always tough Jared Gordon. His only UFC loss came against Bobby Green, in which he was TKO'd in 33 seconds, but after this he was able to bounce back and is currently on a 3-fight win streak. So far he's had a total of 13 fights in the UFC, and after one of them he had a pretty viral moment in a post-fight interview.
But there's one more person I have to thank even more, and that is my beautiful, beautiful wife. How much she supports me is literally my favorite thing about her. Well, it's my second favorite thing about her. My first favorite thing is she's got a dump truck you could bounce a quarter off of.
Charles Byrd was 7-4 when he got on the Contender Series, and out the gate things would not go his way. His initial opponent pulled out of the fight, so instead he took on and would submit Jamie Pickett in the first round of week 1. But instead of getting a contract, he would be asked to come back in week 6, where 2 more opponents would pull out, causing him to have to fight another late replacement. But this guy actually fights in a smaller weight class and didn't want to pass up on the opportunity. Again, Byrd would win by submission and become the first person to win twice on this show, and this time would earn a UFC contract. He would also go on to win in his UFC debut by submission, but then would go on a 3-fight losing streak, getting knocked out in all 3 of those fights, therefore causing him to not only get cut from the UFC but also decide to retire in 2020. He is now an MMA striking coach and personal trainer at an MMA gym in Dallas, Texas called Fortis. Joby Sanchez would get signed in the UFC after getting a 6-0 record, but then he would go 1-2 in the UFC, causing him to get cut back in 2015. Outside the promotion, he would get a couple more wins and then go on the Contender Series for the first time in week 1, winning by decision, but just like Charles Byrd, he'd get asked to come back in week 7, but this time he would earn a contract after winning by TKO. And inside the UFC, he would immediately lose 2 fights in a row, which caused him to get cut, and after that he would go 2-1 in a couple smaller organizations and retire in 2019 with a finishing record of 13-5. Benito Lopez got into the Contender Series with a record of 7-0. After a very back and forth hard fought battle, Lopez would win a split decision on the show, but in the UFC he would go 2-2 and retire after a submission loss to Mario Batista back in 2022, and would retire with a finishing record of 10-2. Lauren Mueller became the first woman to win a contract on the Contender Series and was the only woman to win a contract in this season. She got on the show with a record of 3-0 and would earn a contract after winning a decision, and she would also win in her UFC debut, but then would go on a 3-fight losing streak before getting dropped, and outside the UFC she would lose her next and final fight, making it 4 losses in a row and officially retiring with a record of 5-4. Currently she has a beef and dairy cattle ranch, is a private coach, and in her Instagram bio she has a cross followed by a link to her OnlyFans, so she should probably look into removing one of those. Allan Crowder got onto the Contender Series with a record of 8-2, and he had also won a title in a smaller organization. He got a contract after knocking out Dontel Mays, and he would go 1-2 in the UFC, with his only win being a Greg Hardy disqualification. So in actuality, he never really got a win in the UFC, and after getting knocked out by Jairzinho Rozenstruik in just 9 seconds, he would call it a career in 2019 with a record of 10-4. He now owns and coaches at a gym in North Carolina called Scorpius MMA. Matt Fvola came into the Contender Series with an undefeated record of 5-0. He would earn a contract after submitting Luke Flores, and in the UFC, things wouldn't go very well at first. In his debut, he would get TKO'd, and then after that, he would fight to a draw against Lando Venata, but things would finally turn around as he would win his next 2 fights, but then would lose to Arman Sarukian by decision and get knocked out in 7 seconds by Terrence McKinney. But then he would turn things around yet again and go on a 3-fight win streak, knocking out all 3 of his opponents. opponents, but then again would lose 2 more fights by knockout, and in his most recent fight, he was viciously and virally knocked out. Matt has had an absolute roller coaster of a career so far, but he always manages to bounce back, so it'll be interesting to see who he's matched up with next, and if he's able to get back in the win column.